Kei te mihi au ki te kaupapa o te rā, i ngā waitapu, ngā maunga whakahi, ngā whare pune me ngā whare wānanga o tēnei rohi, tēnā koutou te ina nahi, te ina ia nei, me te apopo, ko tēnei tako mihi ngā tangata whenua o te rohi nei. I ngā iwi, i ngā mana, i ngā reo e rau rangatira mā, tēnā koutou katoa. My name's Ganesh, first generation New Zealander, born and bred here in Poriki. Acknowledge Māori as tangata whenua Aotearoa and acknowledge myself as tangata treaty. It's a stressful time to be in Aotearoa, and I think we should all acknowledge it. And I personally would make a pretty clear statement that I'm neither a Singh nor a Patel, and I've never eaten butter chicken. But I will say quite strongly that those comments are more than offensive, they are racist. And it puts me in a difficult position because I've been subject to racism since, I wouldn't say the year dot, but since as long as I can remember. It has hurt me a lot and it continues to hurt. But the hurt this time is that it's coming from Māori. And that really has hurt me because through most of my life, Māori have been my closest friends. And I don't want to generalise, but it is a... Oops, we've got some people coming in. Oops. I don't know what you're hearing. I'm hearing something coming through my speakers. Sorry, put me off. It's fine. Yes, I just recognise, as always, that Māori are tangata whenua Aotearoa and indeed immigrants are here as a result of treaty and indeed have been welcomed by Māori here, despite the fact that Māori probably haven't had much, have had much influence in terms of immigration decision-making in the past. Turning to what I would need to address, which is around investment, and I focus on this word investment because it's critical, and I suppose my presentation is actually targeted at particular responses to that regulatory conversation that we had with, and apologies, I forget her name, but the presenter from Australia, the Australian MP. That focus on regulation is critical, and dare I say, in the context of Aotearoa, that focus on the Ministry of Regulation, of which I have a bit of personal background with, but that's sad, but never mind. How you approach your engagement with regulation is critical. I would hope coming out of my 3 minutes here is to give you a bit more ammunition about how you talk about investment to those people in regulation, because investment is a word that has been misused by a lot of people to pull the wool over your eyes, I think, and drive you into a narrative that justifies their world rather than your world. And so I think that's where probably don't need to be apologetic about investment, but you need to frame it properly. So maybe the next slide, please. Thank you. The words are around investment, but recognise investment means different things to different people. And it's important whether you talk about investment from a financial framing or from an economic framing, and thereafter what other sorts of framing you might want to frame it in. And in the side, alongside that word investment is value, which similarly, and apologies, is a typo on my slides I done late last night, is similarly financial framing versus an economic framing. And then let's talk about ECE in terms of this thing called social contract, which I will pick up from Paul previous. He's talking about social cohesion. It's a great segue into my perspective on the world in terms of that social contract, in terms of social cohesion, and how that is important from an economic perspective. And if you don't take anything else away from it, when I mean economics, I don't mean business. Okay, so I'm not talking about profit or not for profit. I'm talking about economic, and we can go down that in a second. Hopefully I don't take up too much of your time. So next slide, please. The investment framing that I think the Ministry of Regulation would probably like you to buy into, and I know many others would love for you to buy into, it's in a nutshell, let's pick up in that ROI measure. Everybody loves ROI. You know, it's all the rage. Return on investment. Investment is only good if you get a return from it. Well, irrespective of that, there is a textbook there that they don't talk about. Investment in that framing means it's a metaphor for saving. It's a totally different animal. If you want to talk about ROI, it means you're not spending now. You are saving now, and you are not spending because you want some interest to give you a return, which you will then spend into the future. That's a different world. It's a different context. It's framed to bring you into the conversation, to pull the wool over your eyes. Everybody saves, everybody invests. It's the right thing to do. I can almost hear, or I do hear my father talking to me, down to me, and says, you've got to save for your future. It's the same, and then you will get an interest return, and then you will spend. To me, that's not the world you want to be in, but that's a world that I think many are trying to push you into when they talk about investment. The next slide, please, though. Recognize the difference between this financial framing and this economic framing. The economic framing for investment, and again, there's a textbook. Investment in the economic framing is all about productive resources. Somebody's got their mic on, sorry. Productive resources is important. What do we mean by productive resources? We can talk about in a second. But productive resources, the rationale is that we want to improve those resources so that we can produce more, or we can produce stuff. And we can talk about that in a second. But what are those resources? And again, it's a textbook, and some people don't like the word resources, but it captures our people. Economists call it labour, or might we call it workers. You and me would probably call it people, the knowledges and the experiences of those people, the machinery and the equipment and the buildings, the land, water, minerals, and all of those things that we have available that we use to produce people. That's our productive resources. And it's framed as it's not really the right thing to do, but we'll do it if we can afford it. We'll improve our resources as long as we can afford it. The important thing is that investment in the economic framing requires us to spend now to improve those resources. And the returns, if you like, are better production in the future. Contrast that with financial framing, the previous slide, requires you not to spend now. It requires you to save. Those two things are critically different, but they're glossed over when the Ministry of Regulation or other economists like to bring you into the challenge of we've got to invest, and this is our world, and this is what it means, and then they go down to a return on investment framework. So next slide, please. Just talk in those two worlds about value, just reinforcing that value from investment from a financial framing, if you're talking about ROI, is all about interest returns, or something about the reward from not spending now, and it's predominantly received by the same person who does the saving. Okay, that's critical. I save, I invest, term deposit in Kiwibank, and then I get the interest a couple of years later or 5 years later. It's the same person. Economic framing, I invest in building a house and providing shelter for my whānau. Better productive resources, ability to produce shelter is a lot better, enables better production, enables productivity. We can talk about that, but the value is not received just by me. It's received by my whānau, and indeed the community who benefit from everybody who has that shelter. Again, totally different framing. And what's the return on investment? They didn't talk about return ROI for economic framing because they're not interested in the value of those productive resources. They're only interested in the financial framing. So just next slide, please. Apologies if I'm scooting through this. I'm conscious of my timing. Just reinforce the differences between the value in these two worlds. The value from financial investment is all about ROI, and it's all associated with the individual. One person does this and they get the reward for it. Economic framing means I need to spend now. I might get some better resources, but the difference between who invests and who gains may not necessarily be the same. Who invests may be you. Who gets the gains? Well, maybe a community. They're different animals, and the measure of that ROI is different. The measure of the value from the investment is different. I'm not sure that that distinction is recognised when we go into the Ministry of Regulation type narrative about the value of the investment in, dare I say, ECE, or the value of investment in health or in housing, all of those sorts of things. They all talk about ROI as the only thing that matters when we talk about investment. So pushing forward to the next slide, let's focus a little bit, bring it home to ECE. Well, if you're talking about financial framing, if you're in that world, if you're talking about ECE, you have to be saving now. You're not spending now. Well, that doesn't work for ECE because we are spending now. The value is not to the individual. It's not to the child who's getting the service of ECE. The ROI is totally devoid of any applicability. It doesn't work. So don't get sucked into a financial framing of ECE. I would argue quite strongly that you avoid anything that has ROI about it. If it is ROI, attack it and pull it to shreds and get the other side to justify what they mean by ROI. In terms of a economic framing, next slide, please. It's not quite the best thing since sliced bread, but as an economist, it's potentially helpful, but it requires you to see, and this is where I worry quite openly, it pushes you into a framing of ECE as totally a service for business and the economy, for economic activity. So you're providing a productive service. So you're building people and labour. So your role as ECE provider is primarily to ensure our people are ready to enter the workforce. It's sort of helpful in that it's investment, in the sense that you're spending now to deliver benefit into the future, and you're spending now, and it may be the people who get the benefit are different, so it's slightly better, but it does, and this is my problem, it does mean that you have to, or you're sort of accepting that education is only as a role to prepare the workforce for the economy, and it sort of accepts the objective that the economy is there to produce more stuff. I think it needs a little bit more nuance than that, but it's way better than that financial framing. And I just put in there the note, and we've heard all about the for-profit sector before, which I fully agree with what's been said before. The problem with the for-profit sector is the investment framing. The investment question doesn't even work anywhere, because the for-profit ECE world is all about a commodity. It's commodification of ECE. It's an anathema because they don't like investment. Anything that's a commodity doesn't like investment because it's just another product transaction that they're churning out there and they're trying to get you to buy it. It has no characteristics of either financial or economic investment. It has none of the characteristics of getting a return either now or into the future. So economic framing of investment sort of helps. Commodification is totally out. We need a new model for that. So we'd push back strongly about that, but we need what is the ECE framing? And then the next slide, please. I will push forward. To me, this is where I'm into that social contract framing. And I'm very much a keen believer of a social contract in terms of how we look at the economy rather than the other way around, where we have the economy over here and society is somewhere in the middle serving the economy. It's the other way around. You have economy in the middle, which serves our society. And that social contract framing, what is that social contract? Well, it establishes those rules or the guardrails for economic activity, and I have written a bit in here, and you can pick it up if you like. It's those rules and guardrails that are important for an economic system to work, for social cohesion to work. And the reason why is, and one of the reasons why, as Paul has noted, that we're getting this breakdown in social cohesion, breakdown in trust and confidence in institutions, I would argue is because these rules and guardrails are not being enforced. We're talking about regulation before. We've got part of that social cohesion was we send our tamariki to early childhood centres. We are provided, we believe we have some security about their safety or some guarantees about their safety. They will be looked after, they will be fed well, they might even be assisted to learn, and then they'll be given back to us at the end of the day or whatever that. But that's for want of a better, social contract, which does require trust. But that's breaking down because we haven't regulated. The rules are not being followed by one side of the party. For example, one of the rules we had was minimum wage and self-employment conditions. One of the rules we used to have was pay equity, but we won't go into that here as well. But what are those rules and guardrails that will help us build that social contract? That's the conversation that we need to have. And that's where you place ECE in terms of investment. Next slide, please. I've only got 3 or 4 more slides, then I'll disappear. How does ECE deliver value? Let's talk about value in the context of your contribution to and your strengthening of that social contract. So you're framing ECE investment. Yes, you are spending now. So that's more in the economics field rather than financial field, but you're doing it to deliver a kaupapa of improving that intergeneration wellbeing. So you're investing now, not necessarily to get the benefits now and not necessarily for yourself, but for building those communities that will deliver value into the future. It helps with it's not an either or. You can use that in the context of the economic framing to keep the Ministry of Regulation people in the frame. So yes, we are building the labour force for the future, but it's also acknowledging that social cohesion is required for the economy to function. If the social cohesion falls apart, if my trust in the other side breaks down, like when I go to work and I don't have trust in them keeping me safe, abiding by health and safety, let alone minimum wage, then I'm not going to offer myself for work. That is part of that social contract. ECE delivers investment in terms of providing, right from the very beginning, the recognition that people are part of communities within which economies function, within which businesses function, within which communities function. And I haven't said openly, but, and I should say openly, this fits or should be able to fit easily within our Te Tiriti responsibilities and obligations. Because dare I say it, and I could say it out loud, I'm not sure whether I'm not, but Te Tiriti is our founding document. I would argue it's our founding component of our social contract in Aotearoa, and it remains there, irrespective of what other sides are trying to share it, rip it apart. And it helps with taking the ECE role beyond just a servant of preparing the workforce. And lastly, a couple of last slides, one more please. In amongst all of this, if you accept that the economy is beyond just preparing, beyond more than just producing more, so we just need a workforce to produce more. What if the economy is you need a workforce for this objective that's on the slide? Then that again enables you to talk about a social contract where your contract is actually with one of the parties to that social contract is future generations. And we need to live up to our side of the contract in terms of delivering for them. And if you think all of this is just me thinking out loud, I put on the next slide a few other supportive economic thoughts and models which go beyond the narrow financial ROI investment model. All of these models are there for you to pick up or for me to pick up in the conversation with those regulatory bodies that are trying to say, oh, we've got to reduce the regulations. Because actually, if we're serious about the social contract model, we need strong regulation because we need that social cohesion, because we need individuals and communities to believe they have trust in someone abiding, or all of us abiding by those rules and regulations. Lastly, last slide, one more, thank you. For those who think I'm talking out of my head, I love this quote that I'll use all the time. If you don't believe anything, I think, when the Financial Times, which is a UK business newspaper in London, talks about investments, talks about public services, dare I say, of which ECE needs to be, and there was a comment coming across in the chat box in response to the conversation about for-profit and not-for-profit. Let's put ECE as a public service, which is an investment rather than a liability. And I'd love that for me to be imposed. And I'll leave that with you. My last slide is just a picture of something that I hold dear, that we are doing a lot of damage to, and we need to start thinking about in terms of that social contract for future generations. Nō reira, tēnā koutou, kia ora koutou katoa.